So I will treat you as Professor Anne. It's a matter of respect for your work and for what you bring, all your knowledge. And for me, it's a great honor to welcome you to this podcast. And I would like to appreciate your work. First of all, what you stand for and the fight you have been taking to protect Mother Earth. As I think everyone who stands on the land, breathes the air and drinks the water should. And in a previous interview, you said something that really struck me because I feel connected to that. The more I know, the more I don't. And
Yeah,
could you tell me more about what does that mean to you and
yeah,
also
yeah.
about
I
your
will, but in terms of protocol, I
uh
would like to acknowledge Mabubayan, ngajinu nila walan palinan, ngayon marawaraman, ngay manda jaran Nyikina nganga in Jukananyaru country in this beautiful place that I call home. So in my language, I was just acknowledging the land, but also that I'm in Broome, which is the home of Jukananyaru people, and that part of the protocol is to understand that the land is alive. It holds memory and it builds new memory. And today we are creating together, Sarah, a new memory on this landscape and wherever you may be. So, from that perspective, there is a duty of care and a moral obligation to acknowledge the earth. So, that's what I'm doing.
Thank
You
you.
asked me that question, and I often say this, the more I know, the more I do not know. And I think that is important for many of the people I work with because we are dealing with complexity and we need multiple wisdom, science in all its forms, but also the indigenous wisdom of the people from the lands and the sea and the biodiversity across the world. So, from that perspective, we are dealing with complexity, and not one human could know everything. And that's what I say. The more I know, the more inquiry I have in my mind. And, 2 PhDs, 3 masters, and a whole history of nursing and care at the beginning. But also coming from a world of care and ethics and values. So I think in terms of that question, it's really understanding that we have limitations as human beings and that we need to work together. One of the things that we say as Indigenous people is that we come from a world of we and not me. So individualism is not something to be cherished because collectively we need to work together and walk together and think and dream together and come up with new ways of, trying to really bring the solutions that we have. We know what the solutions are, but there's just no investment for doing that. So from that perspective, it is really important that we really focus on, as I said earlier, that we come from a world of we, not me, but also that we, in terms of Indigenous people, is we come from a holistic society. We do not come from a dichotomous society that cuts everything out. So land, water, people, the environment, and non-human kin are all intrinsically entwined because they make up what we say the balance and the peace and the harmony for good luck.
Oh, that's so powerful. And you have that sense of community so ingrained in your culture. We used to live in communities and we need communities, but nowadays seems like the other day I was listening to a podcast and someone was saying that while a while ago we to raise a child we needed a community, a whole community, and nowadays through this capitalist system we pay for other people to do the work a community used to do. So that's really important what you say.
Particularly in growing a child up, it's very interesting. That I come from a beautiful place that we were always very caring in our family because my mother had a motto, somebody's son. So anyone who would be laying on our front veranda or in our garden, we would pick them up, we would look after them, we would nurture them, we'd get them on their feet, we'd bring them in and feed them and look after them because they were somebody's son.
Uh-huh.
So I come from a very large family. I have 8 brothers and 4 sisters,
Oh,
and it's interesting because this ethics of care, this bonding, which we have as Indigenous people, really starts before, in a way, before conception. Like I've just come back from a field visit and I went to a very, very sacred place where my grandmother spirit was born, and so therefore she produced all of us. So it's taken me almost 70 years to get there, and being
oh,
there and feeling it and seeing it, and just sitting there by the waterside and thinking of my family and how my grandmother actually got to be where she was, which was in the 1800s. There was a very, very big massacre where a lot of my great grandmother's family were massacred. my great grandmother came into a very special place called Nukumba. And so
Mhm.
when she was traveling around the landscape, this is where my grandmother was probably conceived. So everything is connected, everything is about balance. So,
So,
we
yeah.
understand that as humans, we are equal to nature. We are equal with the totem. When we are born, we're given a totem. We call
Mhm.
it in our language a challenge, which is an animal, a bird, a tree, whatever. But that
Mhm.
totem teaches us an ethics of care. And who could believe that an animal or bird can teach you how to be a good and decent human being? So these
Hello.
are the things that we learn from the very, very early age, to look down, look up, look around, and see everything in its context. So it's a very, very interesting world, and it's a world that Indigenous people, First Nations, all across the world want to share with fellow human beings. So let's walk together and dream together and see, can we right size the planet, and can we and our young people not born yet have a climate chance?
Yeah, you highlighted something really important, the interconnectedness of all systems and beings, everything that surrounds us. Yet
Yeah.
today, I feel that many people, well, people in general feel disconnected, not just from the natural world, but even also from ourselves and what is happening in society in general. We are watching a crime against humanity happening, and I feel that we are alienated from those type of things. And how can we begin to understand that we are part of a great living system that can only thrive in symbiosis? How can we move away from the mindset of conquest and control?
Yeah, I think first of all, just to, what I see around the world is really a clash of values,
Mhm.
ethics, and virtues. And so,
Mhm.
one of the important things from that is we have what we called first law, law of the land, where the land teaches us how to coexist, how to come up with the rules or the principles of engagement. How
Mhm.
are we going to live together so that we can live a civilized world, a civilized society? So
Mhm.
really, with our what we call first laws are the values, the ethics, the virtues. It starts with key principles of relationship. Everything is in relationship. The birds, the trees, the wind, the living water system. Everything is in relationship with each other. And so one of the things that what we like to share and say is that everything is alive. And it's really important because sometimes what we say is everything is place based. Wherever you are, you can connect and build a relationship with nature, with the birds around us. I can hear some singing in the background. All of these things are all connected. And so one of the things that we say is we communicate with the animals, with the birds, with the trees.
Mhm.
We could be out on the river and one of the other elders will say, "Oh, the wind is coming from a strange place. Maybe it's sending us a message. Maybe there's something." Let's pause and just feel the land and
Mhm.
wait for the message because something is happening. And so everything is about energy, about how do we exchange that. So we start with relationship, we
Mhm.
build respect, we build reciprocity in terms of it's not like I'm going to do this for you and you've got to do something for me. It's just the way that our world is. And so with relationship, respect, reciprocity comes rights, but with rights comes
Mhm.
responsibility. So these values, these ethics keep us grounded. They teach us right from wrong, good from bad. We have what we say inside us, and everyone has it. They just need to activate it. We call it in my language, lian. It's your
Mhm.
spirit, it's your moral compass that
Mhm.
guides you through life. And once you tune into it, you will see that it actually works. So it teaches you how to be warned against danger.
Mhm.
Sometimes you see people coming and you go, I have a feeling that that person is maybe coming to do harm. You know what I mean? So it's
Mhm.
all about energy. And this world that we live in teaches us through our values, through our ethics, through our virtues, through the belief that we are to leave the planet as good ancestors and that we have a duty of care, not just to our own people, but to everyone who lives in the region. And that's how we govern from the beginning of time, always on scale, always from a biocultural, bioregional perspective,
Mhm.
bringing people in, appreciating diversity and learning and also unlearning how
Mhm.
to live in a world where we self regulate our behavior. We didn't need regulation. We didn't need a regulator. We didn't need rules that were banging out the table saying, you must do this, you must do that. Once we agree as civilized people to live in this way with our nature, with our birds, with our fish, with all of the things, we learn that in order to have peace and harmony, we have to self regulate our behavior. So that's a little
Mhm.
bit different to, Western law and Western thinking. And so what I
Mhm.
see now is a real clash of these values, these ethics, these virtues. And, it's almost like we're living in a time where the laws and the policies are no longer fit for purpose, one, to sustain our human rights, but two, to ensure that there is earth justice and the rivers and everything has a right to reach its full potential. So we have a real clash of values. And I think one of the big issues is looking at all of this is the fact that
Mhm.
with Western thinking has come colonialism and capitalism and
Yeah.
produce. Capitalism is noted for making things that you don't need, but being able to
Yeah.
sell it. So, we've gone from what we need and to abundance, and yet
Mhm.
the lives of many are suffering.
That's true. And you said something really important, that is unlearning. How can we unlearn things that have been practices, and even how can we reconciliate with the past what we did, if we continue to do the same things? Because people talk about colonialism, but it's something that perdured over time in a different way, but a modern type of colonialism that we are still exploiting people and abusing. And even the indigenous peoples, we are not giving them the place, the space for them to speak up and to share their knowledge with everyone, and we need it.
Yeah. I think part of this is really understanding that. Have you heard of Paulo Freire?
Yeah. Yes.
Paulo Freire was a South American educator,
Mm-hmm.
and he is responsible for two very, very powerful books. The first
Mm-hmm.
one was called The Pedagogy of Oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what it shows you is the characteristics of colonization. It's called anti dialogic action. Somebody comes in, they invade you, they conquer you, they manipulate you, and
Yeah.
they create unjust circumstances and conflict. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the pedagogy of oppression, where those characteristics are really played out, particularly in terms of colonialism and capitalism. And it's a very, very important book because it's about anti dialogue. And that's what we're seeing in the world at the moment is that governments are saying, in terms of the politics of economics, this is the way we're going to do business. This is the way you will behave. We will give you some illusions such as cost of living and that we don't have any money, and so therefore we have to tax the little people and
Yeah.
allow the big multinational companies to walk away. So it really is a time when you said, this important thing about unlearning is really,
Mm-hmm.
really important because none of us are perfect and we do make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes and we can unlearn and learn new
Mm-hmm.
ways of thinking. I think one of the big issues is that everyone keeps talking about, oh, Indigenous people are and Native people and First Nations are guardian, the last bastions of biodiversity. But they are doing it, we are doing it under great pressure, great stress, and that all sometimes we want is to be left alone and to look at what is the quality of our life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you live in Australia? Where do you live?
I live in Portugal.
Portugal, beautiful. So, all of these things is that like we look around the world and we see so much and you kind of go like, here we are spending so much of our world's money on warmongering when we should be making peace. And we look
Right.
across the world and we see, the ravages of war, of warmongering, of buying obsolete technology that is so out of date because we are chasing the US and really believe that that's the answer to the
Mm-hmm.
whole of the world's power solutions, the economic solutions, all of those things. So really, when we live in a place like Australia with the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, our nearest neighbors are Asia and the Pacific.
Yeah.
So why are we jumping to a place that really is struggling in terms of world leadership and world domination, where other, and I'll say colored nations, are
Mm-hmm.
thinking differently about how can we right size the planet? How can we look at what could be the new economies other than oil and gas? What
Mm-hmm.
is our duty of care towards people living now, but also people who have a right to live in the future? how do we weigh all these things up? And, from a economic perspective,
Mm.
how do you measure where I live, which is so amazing and so beautiful? And about a month ago, my son produced with Wild Pacific an amazing documentary on it was 3 separate episodes, and they've sold it to Arte, so it'll go around the world, but you look at
Great.
this and you kinda go, "Ah, there is nowhere else." My son repeats it in the film and the series, "Nowhere else but here," and it is actually true. We have species here that are not found anywhere else on the planet. A couple of years ago, somebody from UNESCO contacted and said, "Would you like to build a living water museum?" And we said, "No, thanks, we've already got one." They
Yeah.
said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "The valley tracks, they're so diverse. They're uplifted, they're down, biodiversity, cultural diversity." So we, in terms of the Muttawarra Fitzroy River watershed, are the first in the world as a living water museum. And so
Mhm.
we're really creating these stories. We're sharing them with the world. Importantly, one of the works that we're doing is that we're trying to get government to realize, what have we got here before we destroy it? Because these
Mhm.
places are very, very rare around the world. And one of the things with capitalism is that as things become scarcer, the value of it should increase
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it's rare.
Yes.
And what we're saying is that, oil and gas, there needs to be a conversation in this country because we still keep getting the story that oil and gas is still the transition fuel.
Uh-huh.
Right now, our prime minister is over in China talking about green hydrogen, but
Uh-huh.
one of the things that we're saying as knowledge brokers is, what is all, and this is where collective wisdom comes in, what
Uh-huh.
is the true cost burden of green hydrogen? It
Yeah.
needs a lot of fresh water. Where's that water going to come from?
True.
When water really is the new gold and it's becoming more and more scarce around the world, we should be looking after our water. Like, everywhere groundwater has gone almost from a meter above the surface
Mhm.
to almost a meter underneath. So these systems are changing as a response to climate change.
Mhm.
And so what we're saying is that one of the things we're very, very clear about is that we are not anti-development. We want just development on just terms. And
Mhm.
part of that is to look at, what have we got here? The diversity of the people, the biodiversity of the land, the species. I mean, we have birds here. I mean, the world's songbirds, the majority of the world's songbirds come from our country. And
Good.
so, all of these things, I guess what we are saying is that, how do we just have a pause? How do we really understand what is the burden of oil and gas for 20 years, as opposed to what we call the forever economies, the economics of well-being, around
Mhm.
global geoparks, around biosphere reserves,
Mhm.
around culture conservation and science economies, around the
Mhm.
ability to walk across the land. And there's actually a frame, it's called ecotherapy. When
Mhm.
you walk the land, the energy systems recharge your spirit,
That's true.
recharge your humanity, recharge you so that you understand that you can appreciate what creation has given to us and
Uh-huh.
what we are doing to that. So it's a kind of, having that pause. But also, one of the things we say as Indigenous and Native people is that, take a chance, meet Indigenous people, get to know them, get to be a part of them, and your world and your life will only become more beautiful and more powerful. So powerful in a sense that you understand yourself, not
Mhm.
power in terms of domination, but power to understand that we are living in living systems that need our care and our love and our attention.
That's so beautiful. And you mentioned two things like the oil sector that is been feeding this capitalist system and all the injustice that we see. And also, this information is spreading across the world regarding climate change. And then you mentioned water, really important. We have water scarcity, especially drinking water, and we need it so much because without water there isn't life. And what is the
Exactly.
impact of climate change in Australia and especially in your region?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very, very interesting because most of our people still live on our lands and our waters and
Hmm.
with nature, and live on our tribal lands. And so one of the things that we've been noticing is that these systems are changing.
Hmm.
The living waters, as we call them, are drying up. The fruit and the medicines are not reproducing. we use what we call seasonal calendars, and we look into the environment to see the biocultural indicators, and we can see things like we have a special tree that when it drops its flower, we know the crocodile eggs are hatching. That
Mhm.
is all out of sync. It's not happening when it's meant to happen. And so the species are born later. And so there's a whole cycle that's totally disrupted
Mhm.
because the earth is sort of going, hey, humans, what are you doing? You are destroying your own life support system. Can you slow down? Can you have a pause? Can you understand that nature is there for your survival and your revival?
True, and we actually don't realize that our lives here are at stake because if we go extinct, other nature will continue to thrive in different ways with different species. Probably not humans, but actually don't.
It's interesting because I recently published a paper about this, like, because the Extinction Rebellion people say, oh, if we're so stupid, we'll meet our own demise. And I
Uh-huh.
quickly come back and say, if that happens, Mother Earth will be lonely without the vibration of humans on her girth. So you are right. The Earth will continue. And I believe that there will be Indigenous, First Nations, Native people who will survive
Okay.
and continue to flourish, but at great cost, because
Yeah.
we've seen this happening already in terms of what climate is doing. I actually call it climate wars.
Mm.
And so we're moving from a climate peace to climate wars, and the dream is, can we have a climate chance? And that's why it needs all of us to work together. One, to push back on the failure of government and governance to lead, to be in a time of political economy where it's the big multinationals that are profiting and everyone is struggling. And
Mhm.
so, what does economic democracy look like if we are so dependent on these life support systems, yet they are coming into a situation where it's highly likely that if we don't have a pause, we keep producing the amount of, fugitive emissions, greenhouse gases,
Yeah.
we will certainly meet our own demise. I live in the Kimberley. One of the questions you asked was,
Mhm.
what is climate impact happening on your land? Well, I think the first thing for me really is unjust development and the illusion of probity, the pretense that everything's all been checked out, that there's no room for risk. The government and these big companies are very certain that they can continue to extract oil, extract gas, frack the landscape, but also this ridiculous idea of pumping back the toxic remnants of oil and gas into
Mm.
the bowels of the aquifers, which some take thousands and thousands of years to recharge.
Yeah.
So everything is short term for Western thinking, 3-year election cycles, 3 years of government being in power. And so they cannot think long term. They cannot think beyond 10 years when really what we need is a plan for the next 30 years.
No, they think short term. Short term is what really matters. They cannot think about the seventh generation principle, right? Think 7 generations ahead. What will happen? Each action we take, what will happen 7 generations from now? And I was recalling a conversation I had also with an Indigenous woman, Casey Kemp-Horinek. I don't know if you know her. She's from the Ponca Nation.
She sounds lovely.
And she mentioned, well, we refer to Mother Earth, well, the industry as resources, but we should shift and think about it as source, the source of everything. And actually, it is related to what you said. And we were discussing about the climate impacts in your specific region.
We were talking about, how the land and the living waters and the
Mm.
foods, all of that is actually changing. The systems are changing. So part of the problem with oil and gas
Mm.
and government is the fact that there's an illusion of probity. There's a pretense that everything's fine. There's no risk. Trust us. Everything will be okay. But one of the things when we're dealing with these old systems is that we don't know the impacts, because some of these systems, particularly the groundwater in the aquifers, they take thousands and thousands of years to recharge.
True.
So some of the risks that we are taking, we may not know for another 100 or so years what the full impact of that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the big things that's very, very worrying to the other elders is one of the things is the sludge that's produced from the oil and gas industry. There's conversations about taking that and putting it back into the aquifers, into the
Yeah.
earth. They're called aquifer recharge.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, we are taking risks. As you said earlier, we're not thinking 7 generations ahead. We are, in a way, government and the economic system is just thinking about the now, not the future.
True.
And so these things are really, really important. One of the things you mentioned was there was another beautiful woman that you were talking to, and you described her as a activist. I don't describe myself as an activist. I describe myself as an actionist. That activism is very, very important and people lock on and, you know, rebellion, extinction. But for me, it's want to be investing in the transformation and the change. So I need to act. And that's one of the conversations from Paulo Freire, anti-dialogic action and dialogic action. It's not enough just to talk about something. We actually have to put effort in and transform the systems so that we can get justice and equity for everything, not just ourselves as human beings, but, you know, the right for nature to live and earth jurisprudence and all of those things. There's a big complexity there. So right now, in a situation where we have a very large basin, 500,000 square kilometers onshore
Mm-hmm.
and 1,000 offshore. And one of the things about this land is that it's highly folded and fractured. So
Mm-hmm.
some things come up, some things stay down. So you've got concern in terms of how stable the geology is. And now when we fracture it, particularly for oil and gas, particularly for unconventional oil and gas, what we do is we fracture the backbone of country. So the gas and the oil doesn't just come up the pipe, it comes up everywhere where the backbone of country has been fractured. And so with this fugitive emission, one of the things where I live is that we have wildfires. So how are we going to put out wildfires that are ignited through our volatile gases? How are we going to do that? You know what I mean?
Right. We also have the problem of wildfires here in Portugal. And I was thinking about water again, because water is really important. And if we consider water as an ancestor that carries memories, because it has been here since the beginning of times, and we carry that, the water within us, it will be carrying memories, what we are doing to the water generations from now. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I said, you know, the risks they are taking, it's foolhardy because they will not know for at least 100 or so years what the true impact, what the cost of what they're doing is going to be to the land, to the people, to the environment. So it's a really interesting conversation. So one of the things I mentioned is that as Indigenous people, we not anti-development. We are pro-just development. And so we are working very, very hard with many different people, one, to show a comparison between what we call the forever economies or the economics of well-being. What would that look like of 20 years of investment as opposed to oil and gas for 20 years that leaves a big mess and then it's up to the public purse to remediate. And there are many mines in Australia that have not been remediated. They would just be far too costly to do that. And so we already have, you know, changed the cultural landscape, changed the landscape, changed living water systems. And much of that is because the way leadership and governance happens in our nation is that we have states and territories, and we have a federal government, and the states and the territories have the power around the resources. So last year, I was a commissioner for water right across this country. So I got to talk to mining companies, to agriculturists, to traditional owners. And the biggest thing that is missing in our country is trust capital. Nobody trusts any level of government. So people are very, very, you know, cautious about promises that they get, and it doesn't match the rhetoric that coming from government that there's no money, we have to tax the people, or we have to, the cost of living's too high. How can we get some of that back? When really there's plenty of money. It's just trickling down to the multinational companies and trickling offshore. Where I live in Kimberley, there's a company called IMPEX, which is a partnership with the Japanese government. They've taken about $48 billion worth of gas from here and paid $120 million in tax. And yet our young people, or the people going to university, are paying in tax to go to university than the oil and gas for the whole of the country. So there is no economic democracy. It's part of the illusion. And part of what people are saying is that how do you fight back against autocracy? Because Australia is seen as a first world country. It's seen to be all equitable. Stations I heard yesterday from the Prime Minister in Singapore saying that Australia is one of those, in a way, we have a word called bludgers. They're riding on the goodwill and the best practice of other nations. They are just doing really, really poorly. So this illusion that there is no money is really a fallacy. This conversation around cost of living, there's plenty of money. It's just not trickling down to our people and our social good. We have doctors who are moving away from private practice because a trade person can earn more per hour than a doctor. And it's just crazy. But to think that, those going to university are paying more in tax than oil and gas is just, it's a crime.
Yeah, it is a crime. And, with lack of trust comes a lack of hope. And
lack of trust brings lack of hope because people are so just trying to survive. Two parents working, children in daycare, old people in the nursing home. It's just about production, and maximizing profit. And for what reason?
Yeah, for what reason? And with the lack of community, we need to pay all those services. And you also mentioned that you have been talking with different, I would say, stakeholders. I don't like that word from the whole country. But as we know, climate change is not neutral the way it impacts people differently. And you are Indigenous and a woman, and being a woman in a vulnerable situation and climate change, how do you find your strength to continue?
I think part of that really is a way that I see the world is that I do not see time in a line. I see it in a circle. And that gives me hope because I can only do what I do, but I believe that what I am doing is going to support the next generation. And maybe some of the ideas that I have can be picked up by others and help them. Really, it's that concept that we don't see time in a linear way, that we believe that, it's an honor to be a human being, to think, reason, to have logic. And when I listen to some of the amazing global speakers, people like Jeffrey Sachs, you kind of, these people get it. And we have to, as I said, this exhibition that we have is being called Wake Up the Snake. How do you create a provocation to get people to think? Because one of the big things is media. Media has really taught people how to be dumbed down. Don't worry about anything. We've got it all under control. Trust us. We know what's happening. You know what I mean? And people are in a milieu of kind of going, well, I don't know where I really stand. I'll believe that the government's going to do the right thing. But what we're seeing is that the disparity in terms of people's quality of life from an amazingly rich country like Australia is that many, many people are suffering, particularly our young people, that they may never own their own home. You know what I mean? Like, that's so crazy.
Snake in many cultures is connected to the feminine, right?
Yes.
The energy, the feminine energy, the nurturing part. Perhaps we are lacking that nurturing side more, bring more women to this side.
No. It's not as crazy as you think. Like in our country, when people came, particularly anthropologists, they went with all the Indigenous men and they looked at the men and they looked at their exoticness and they looked at law and all of those sorts of things. And the voice and I won't say power, the voice, the wisdom of women has really not been factored into that, because women, and even with our own Indigenous men, some of our leaders have been great oppressors of women and not allowed women to flourish. And what we say, I wrote an interesting poem called Matrix versus Patrix, and it wasn't about a competition. It was How do we fuse these characteristics into us, whether we're woman or man? We need the ethics of care, we need to nurture, but we sometimes need to be tough. So in this country, the voices of Indigenous women for a long time, and we have our own law, we have our own values, ethics, stories. We are hardwired with an ethics of care because we can bear children. And so it's almost instinct in us, the need, particularly for Indigenous women. And as I said, I grew up in a family where I have 8 brothers. You know, we all cared about each other, but that premise that was somebody's son, you know, strangers that would come in. So really, it's not about saying, you know, men are more wise or women are more wise. It's how do we come together using the wisdom of masculinity and femininity and the feelings and all of that
Balancing energies.
to build beautiful communities, to build peace, to build harmony, to unite and heal and transform. That's what this is all about. It's not one or the other. It's not about a power imbalance. It's about balance within the systems in which we live, and how can we help everyone to reach their full potential. So we have women's law, we have women's stories, we have very important women, you know, matriarchs through our whole history in our country that were, in a way, fighters and navigators and ambassadors and diplomats, and all of that came in. So I think really it's about showcasing that it's not one or the other, but there is an awakening happening in Indigenous cultures in this country where people are starting to wake up and say, Indigenous women, we need to hear their voices. We need to understand their law system. We need to know how we can work and walk hand in hand, male, female, because at the end of the day, the emphasis was on community well-being, not individualism.
True. But how is the process of reconciliation in Australia with Indigenous people?
Well, I don't know if you heard, but last year we had a very big story here where there was called The Voice, where they were looking to put Indigenous people into the Constitution. And there was a yes campaign and there was a no campaign. And the no campaign were very clever. They said, if you don't know, vote no. And so many people, seriously, they're on almost, you know, and I say these statistics and people can look back and have a look at them, but almost 3 lots of what we have in our country, we have the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and every couple of years they go around and they look at families and business and all that, and they come up with, okay, how well are we doing in this country? Well, 3 statistics ago, 60% of Australians still did not meet an Aboriginal person.
Really?
And so what we're saying to our fellow Australians is those non-Indigenous people, fellow Australians who've got to know Indigenous people, got to know Aboriginal people, got to live with them, got to see the world through their eyes, they are totally transformed as a human being.
I believe in that. I truly
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, yeah. And I was hoping with the referendum, in a way, 60% of our population is non-Anglo. And I thought when the referendum came up that we would have a bit more empathy from people who've come to live here, who've come from hard life and, you know, looking for a dream and wanting to do something different. We thought that we would have a lot more support from the non-Anglo people, but quite a lot of the right wing also got into their communities and kind of felt like if you say yes to Indigenous people, you're going to miss out on something.
Really?
And so many of the new Australians also didn't support our people being put into the Constitution. So for me, reconciliation is what happens place-based, building relationships where we at, where we live, so that people can see that we are all here together and that we need to have a dream and walk and work together in terms of creating what we had many, many centuries ago, really, before this country was founded, was bicultural, bottom-up government, not top-down. When it's top-down, it becomes centralized and toxic. So it's bottom-up, polycentric governance. And so we looked after the commons for the greater common good of all of us, not just for the multinational companies. So these values, these ethics, these virtues are there. But in terms of reconciliation, it's really building a relationship, having a dream at that regional level, finding the opportunities to work together, importantly, to understand the impacts of development so that people collectively can make a decision whether something is going to be harmful or useful or good or adds value or creates a cost burden.
Yeah, really important what you said. And this has been a really lovely conversation. And I'm really inspired by your work, and really happy to get to know you a little bit from this
Yeah, no, thank you.
conversation. And just to end our conversation, and I'm pretty sure we will have a second round in the future, because there's a lot of things I would like to discuss. But do you have any final message for our listeners?
I think I will stay with wake up the snake, wake up your own consciousness, look around you, feel the world, hear the world, connect with Indigenous people, First Nations people, Native people. Your life will be transformed. One of the most important things that Paulo Freire, when he passed away, his book was completed. It was called A Pedagogy of Hope and Freedom. And part of that was being united, being organized, working together in a cooperative way. Importantly, what he brought into that is a word called cultural synthesis,
Mm-hmm.
that we need all these different ways of thinking and being in the world. We need to learn from each other. We need to share all the rich cultures that we have around the world. But when we see colonialism, how do we unpack that? How do we walk forward? So for me, it's about having a dream, sending the dream out, and working really, really hard to make that dream become a reality.
Thank you for those inspiring and wise words. It was an honor. And thank you for your time today, for spending
Thank
the
you.
time with us. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Sarah, for giving me the opportunity to share with you.